How could evil suspicion fall on a family of such substance? After all, the Kimes were rich. Houses in California, Las Vegas, Hawaii, the Bahamas. Their net worth estimated at $10 million.
We went on vacation to her house in the Bahamas. We flew first class, and it was wonderful.
Even their car dealer, Jim Blackner of Cedar City, Utah, was impressed on the occasions he delivered the almost new Lincolns they liked to drive.
Maid answers the door.
A maid?
Uh-huh, a maid. Makes you very welcome, very comfortable.
And your impression when you left? These were good people.
These were good people, yeah. These were good people.
And so when Mrs. Kimes called and asked him to deliver yet another Lincoln, Blackner didn't hesitate, even though they had a new address.
Well, you know, people move.
Yes, said Blackner, he'd have someone drive the car to Los Angeles, and he'd happily take her check.
I asked about Mr. Kimes. I think the first conversation, he was in the shower, and then he was going to call me right back. Then she called me back. He had to run to Japan.
Run to Japan?
Uh-huh.
To Japan? How could he know that Kenneth Kimes Sr. wasn't in Japan? He'd been dead for 5 years. And now Sante Kimes was weaving a career of her own. Blackner couldn't know that the sale he had just made was the loose thread on her web of lies. Then,
Monday morning, we got the check. We called on it to make sure it was good. The check wouldn't clear.
by the time that check bounced at Jim Blackner's car dealership in Utah, there had been many arrests, but few convictions. Records show the Kimes have been grifting all over the country for years. Astonished friends finally had to face the unpleasant truth.
I had no idea that there was another side to this woman. I never saw that other side of her. She was a beautiful, wonderful woman in my eyes.
That was the thing. Friends like Caroline Davis thought they knew her.
State your full name for the record.
Sante Kimes.
Sante Kimes, just one of the many names over the years, has been conning people as far back as anybody's been able to look, says her son, and stealing whatever wasn't nailed down. Almost every time she took little Kent to the store, she'd carry a big purse.
When she comes out, the purse is half full of stuff. Might be oysters, might be lipstick, might be a roast.
A roast beef. I mean,
Roast beef. I mean, it's
you can put it in the oven
Sunday,
and cook it for dinner.
Sunday dinner, yeah. And, yeah, we ate well.
Who is this woman? She appeared to have it all. Friends called her generous, charming, intelligent.
The most captivating thing was her smile, and it was sincere. She cared about people.
A long time ago in Carson City, Nevada, says classmate Dwayne Glansman, the kids thought she was a wonderful young woman named Sandy Chambers.
We were practically inseparable.
But Sandy's best friend, Ruth Tanis, discovered a dark secret. Sandy told Ruth that her real mother was a prostitute in California who had begun to encourage Sandy to join the trade.
She kind of wandered around on the streets in the L.A. area.
But then Nevada Army Colonel Edwin Chambers adopted her when she was almost 13 and tried to turn her around. It seemed to work. But suddenly, when she was in her 20s, there was a warning of everything yet to come. Her young husband discovered to his amazement that she was stealing things. He said she became obsessed about money, was desperately afraid of being as poor as she was on the streets of L.A. She had a split personality, he said. He divorced her. But what did she do? She readopted her old L.A. street name, the name her prostitute mother used when she was selling favors to men. Hers looked like a life headed for small-time trouble until one day she picked up a magazine called Millionaire, and in it she read about this self-made man named Kenneth Kimes. Who was he? Rich and available. Kimes had already raised a family, 2 children, but she caught him on the rebound, and suddenly his life got very exciting.
When we come back, the other side of Sante Kimes, from the people who say she kept them as slaves.
All through my lifetime, how many maids have I had?
Let's say, since you were married to Mr. Kimes.
Oh, gosh, 80, 100.
She felt this need to enslave people and to force them to work against their will.
Sante Kimes has lived a life of privilege, often including friends and acquaintances in her travel plans to beautiful and exotic places. So it came as a shock to at least one of them when she heard Sante and her son Kenneth were prime suspects in the disappearance of a wealthy socialite from New York. We're about to see their role in Irene Silverman's murder may have been their last criminal act, but it was by no means their only one.
Prosecutors say they beat and imprisoned several maids.
I've never yelled loudly, and I have certainly never physically touched any of them.
This video is Sante Kimes in a 1988 deposition denying that she kept slaves. Remember, she was wealthy. Homes in Hawaii, La Jolla, Las Vegas, the Bahamas. And yet, because of the way she treated the women who looked after those homes, she was charged with violating U.S. slavery laws.
All through my lifetime, how many maids have I had?
Let's say since you were married to Mr. Kimes.
Oh, gosh, 80, 100.
These are the places in Mexico from which she recruited the maids. A Hawaiian neighbor named Beverly Stone was even enlisted to help Mrs. Kimes escort one of them from Los Angeles back to Honolulu. She believed in Mrs. Kimes.
She was very, very aggressive and domineering in a really warm way. And she could really talk you into anything.
But later, Stone found herself rescuing the same woman and helping her escape.
She said that she had never been paid, that she was like a slave, that she had been burned, threatened.
Tales of horror from 7 of the Kimes maids found their way to the FBI.
I see Mrs. Kimes as really a predator.
Former prosecutor Susan King says that at the time, the case against the Kimes was only the second of its type ever prosecuted in America.
She felt this need to enslave people and to force them to work against their will.
Sante Kimes was found guilty of conspiracy, involuntary servitude, and transporting illegal aliens. She was sentenced to 5 years. Meanwhile, the maids filed a $6 million lawsuit against her in Hawaii. During her jailhouse deposition, Mrs. Kimes grew angry at the visiting lawyers.
I've suffered brain concussion injuries. I've been incarcerated wrongly for 3 years. I've had the insurance carriers setting me up in this unbelievable deposition, which is endangering my life, my freedom, our family.
What did she do? She turned her anger on the company that carried her homeowner's insurance, demanding that since she was accused of enslaving the maids in her home, the homeowner's insurance should cover it.
You can be insured if somebody trips and falls on your front step, but we don't insure people for keeping slaves.
One lawyer who represented the insurance company, Jeff Portnoy, found himself opposing not just Sante Kimes, but a whole army of lawyers she was able to hire. A total of 77 lawyers, he says, though he claims not all of them were paid.
She's a very evil person, a very dangerous person.
And listen to this. Because she was so insistent, so litigious, in the end, to get Mrs. Kimes out of their hair, the insurance company agreed to settle with the maids.
I think when you got below the surface, you found someone who was capable of doing virtually anything to get what she wanted.
Including, investigators say, suspicious fires at her own homes and businesses. In Las Vegas, on the site now occupied by the Barbary Coast Casino, Kenneth Sr. owned a property called the Times Square Motel. When it burned down in July 1977, this report, prepared by the fire investigator, said of the cause, quote, set by human hands. The Hawaii house, this elaborate place by the sea, burned twice, both fires suspicious. The second, in 1990, was ruled an arson fire, and the Kimes Insurance Company refused to pay. She was furious and showed up at the headquarters of Chubb Insurance in New Jersey, even went to executives' homes. At the same time, a New Jersey police report called Mrs. Kimes dangerous, cunning, a master of disguises, and an escape artist. But it was in the Bahamas that even more terrible things began to happen in the vicinity of the Kimes. By now, it was 1996. Kenneth Sr. had died, and Sante had her son by her side when government sources in the Bahamas tell NBC News Kimes moved to take control of her husband's offshore millions. This is the family's beachfront house in Nassau, now abandoned and crumbling. From this house, say our sources, Kimes tried to persuade banking officials to cover some failed investments. She encountered this man, Syed Bilal Ahmed, the senior auditor for the Gulf Union Bank. He say officials was investigating irregularities in the bank where the Kimes kept their money. When suddenly, he disappeared.
She's a person that we very, very much would like to speak with.
Bahamian Police Superintendent Douglas Hanna.
Possibly the missing man was at the house where the Kimes was staying.
The superintendent said Mrs. Kimes became his #1 suspect. And then...
And once she knew that we were inquiring about her, she appeared to have just vanished.
Vanished? Not quite. In Florida, caught on surveillance video in a discount store. Here's Mrs. Kimes in her Liz Taylor getup stealing $19 worth of lipstick. That's Ken Jr. behind her. But as they're about to leave, they're stopped by an undercover cop. There's a confrontation. Ken tries to bolt with the purse. He doesn't get far. This is the young grifter in court as the judge gives him a break in his bond.
Sir, your attorney has convinced me to reduce your bond to $10,000. That's less than half of the standard bond. You've got a good lawyer. Do what she tells you.
And this was the last anyone saw of Kenneth Jr. until a cross-country tour of deceit brought mother and son to New York. By the time the rest of us learned about them, another man will be found dead in a dumpster, and Irene Silverman would vanish. But how did son Kenny become an accomplice?
From the day he left college and went off with his mom, I knew his life was over as a normal, functioning kid. I knew she'd drag him down.
UC Santa Barbara policeman Alan Cagey and his wife Trish took Kenny in after a fight got him kicked out of his dorm at school. They came to love Kenny, but his mother?
I get upset with Kenny for not standing up to her.
The Cageys came to believe, like so many others before them, that Sante was a crook and tried to get Kenny away from her influence.
He says, no, I have to listen and do what my mother wants.
I looked at him and I said, Kenny, I said, one of these days I'm probably going to have to come visit you in prison.
When we come back.
She had taken a demonstration drive in that car from a dealership and just plain stole it, walked away, parked it in our driveway. We had a stolen Cadillac in our driveway for over 2 months.